Welcome back, boxing fans. As you can tell by the title, we're going to be talking about Ring Magazine's article in this month's Ring Magazine. And I thought it was interesting because I just did a video not that long ago talking about the 10 most exciting fighters in boxing. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. And this, of course, was just my opinion of what fighters I felt were the most exciting fighters in boxing today. You may disagree. Feel free to leave in the comment section below. So when I saw this, I'm like, well, this is kind of what they're doing, right? They're top 12 exciting fighters. So I thought I'd look at it, break it down, give my opinion, talk about the pluses and minuses of their list. Obviously, when Ring Magazine does their pound for pound list or does things of this nature, it's a panel of individuals, ex-boxers, news media people giving their opinions. They sort of calculate the points, and then based on the points, those are the people that end up getting onto their list. So it's not a biased perspective because it's not one individual's breakdown. And because it's many people's, it's also a little weak in the areas because obviously, it becomes based on points and who voted for certain people. I also am going to include the number 13, or the people that they felt didn't qualify for their Dynamite dozen, but obviously broke down into other categories that they went into detail about. So, that's interesting. If you haven't read the article, go buy it. You can buy it obviously online. And I think it's actually free this month. So you can go check it out. You just have to go to the Ring Magazine app, download it. And I think it's right there, and you can open it and read it all for yourself in more detail. So let's get to it. It'd be nice if I had my thing set up. I have this so I can jump between things easier. So I have to figure out how it works because it'd be much easier than going here, going back, and doing things so rudimentary. But, it is what it is. So there we go. There's our Dynamite dozen, Ring Magazine. Quite an artistic image. So let's get to their Dynamite dozen. So this is their breakdown. People may disagree. I don't think the order is specific. It's just based on, how they listed it. So anybody who's obviously a hardcore Terence Crawford fan shouldn't get in their emotions just because Inouye is listed before Crawford, because I think, it's not about that. This is not a pound for pound list. This is Dynamite dozen fighters they think are 12 of the most exciting, most interesting fighters in boxing today. And it's no surprise that Inouye is on this list. He was also on my list for one of the most exciting fighters in boxing today as well. And I think anybody that comes up with a list of that sort of ilk would also put Inouye on their list, or they'd be hard-pressed not to. Then, of course, we have Terence Crawford. And based on his performance against Errol Spence, it would be impossible not to imagine him being a part of the Dynamite dozen. That was a classic ass whipping and really a statement fight for Terence Crawford. And that's why Terence Crawford currently is number 1 pound for pound on my pound for pound list. At number 3, they have Gervonta Tank Davis, a fighter I have on my most exciting list as well. So these 3 fighters all correlate with my list as well. I don't really think Tank Davis is a pound for pound top 10 fighter, and that's no shade towards him. It's just, to be a pound for pound top 10 fighter, you have to be doing things that pound for pound fighters do: winning multiple weight divisions, unifying titles, going for undisputed, fighting pound for pound level competition, right? And unfortunately, this fighter who's 29 years old compared to Bud Crawford, who's 36, and Inouye, who's 30, is leap years behind both of these fighters. And Inouye is just a year older, but Inouye already is a 4-weight world champion and 2-weight undisputed. Terence Crawford is a 3-weight world champion. And if things go the way we are hearing the rumors, he's going to be fighting Madrimov potentially on Saudi Arabian money in the U.S. and that would make him a four-weight world champion, equaling both Canelo Alvarez and Inouye. And he's obviously a two-weight undisputed world champion as well. Davis right now currently is a two-weight champion. Obviously, he's a multiple weight a multiple time 130-pound champion, and he was just elevated by the WBA to super champion at 135 pounds. And he may be fighting Isaac Cruz somewhere down the line, somewhere soon, for that WBA 140-pound title. So he could become a three-weight world champion. And while that's fantastic, a lot of that has to do with who you're fighting and unification fights. When you fight unification fights, you're fighting other champions, right? That's why right now, when we look at the 140-pound division, people are excited about seeing all these champions fight. That's where the excitement arises, right? Because they want to see whom or which one of those champions is really the best. And the only way you can do that is to actually fight one another. With obviously Davis at 135 pounds, you have Lomachenko, you have obviously Shakur Stevenson. These two fighters are pound for pound fighters. If he took on either one of them, that would be easily the best win on his resume. Easily. It ain't even close. You cannot even tell me another fighter that's even closely comparable to a Lomachenko or Shakur Stevenson on Davis's resume, right? And that is the problem. He hasn't done the accolades, but he also doesn't have the names. Then we get to the next group, and that is Canelo Alvarez, also a four-weight world champion and undisputed. Arthur Beterbiev, who is going to be fighting Dmitry Bivol, a pound-for-pound fighter, to become undisputed at 175 pounds. So far, you can see the writing on the wall. The top guys in this list have all been undisputed, outside, of course, of Tank Davis. All of them are big punchers. Inouye, Tank Davis, Crawford, Canelo, and Beterbiev, who's literally got 100% KO ratio. Then we get to David Benavidez. Obviously, he's the hot fighter now, coming off of two great victories in 2023. And obviously a guy who's getting really a lot of attention through social media right now. A lot of that thanks to Mike Tyson, crowning him the Mexican, the Mexican monster. There you go. And then, of course, we have Emmanuel Navarrete. Emmanuel Navarrete, nobody would put him on a pound-for-pound list. And at this point, most people wouldn't put David Benavidez on a pound-for-pound list. But they are both exciting fighters. Navarrete was on my most excited fighter. Beterbiev was. Canelo wasn't. David Benavidez wasn't. So there's some difference between my list and this list, but you can't blame them for putting Benavidez here. Right now, people feel he is potentially the best fighter from 168 to 175. Of course, you need to prove that, but people feel strongly about him, whether that's kickback to anti-Canelo Alvarez sort of fans or if it's based in legitimacy. We will have to wait and see. As far as Navarrete, he's got a fight schedule coming up soon to become a four-weight world champion. But him, like Tank Davis, obviously he needs to fight unification fights, top fighters, really that quality of opponent to really build his name to a pound-for-pound level. Right now, even if he becomes a four-weight world champion, you'd be hard-pressed to put him on a pound-for-pound top 10 list. His best win, probably Oscar Valdez, but we saw Oscar Valdez beat by Shakur Stevenson. Many people feel he lost to Robson Kansakow, right? So, well, it's a solid win, and the way he did it was phenomenal. That was probably easily the most dominant performance against that guy, even though he'd lost obviously several times before to Gary Russell, to Shakur Stevenson as well. But he's exciting, awkward, and he's always fun to watch, specifically because, as I mentioned many times in the past, it's because he's vulnerable. Vulnerability makes fighters exciting. Fans love to watch vulnerable fighters who have great power and score sensational knockouts, but who look as if they could be beat. And because of that, you're always in the end of your seat. You never know how things are going to unfold. And that's quality TV, right? And that's why fans love to see certain fighters fight more than others. Dominance is not an exciting thing to watch. When you watch a guy go in there and easily beat somebody and there's no real pressure coming the other way, it becomes a little redundant. It becomes a little boring. You can look at that fighter and say, he's class, but it doesn't mean you are enjoying watching him fight, right? For the most part, especially when we talk about more casual sports fans who turn in for just big, exciting boxing matches. Navarrete, 29 years old, obviously moving to 138 pounds. This is where he's going to have to step up or basically be exposed, right? His next potential fight after the Ukrainian guy he's fighting now, if he's able to beat him to become a four-weight world champion, may be against another Ukrainian fighter in Vasily Lomachenko for unification. If he could beat Lomachenko and unify titles, that would go leap years to building up his resume, his name, propel him on a pound for pound list. And then if he was to fight a Shakur Stevenson, or a Tank Davis, even though obviously that's a little unlikely, or a Muratalla, another top ranked fighter, these kind of fights would definitely add to his legacy in a big way, specifically Shakur and Lomachenko. But he is an exciting fighter, so I have no problem with him being on this list, as well as David Benavidez, as I mentioned. His 2 wins last year literally put him in contention for Fighter of the Year. So coming off of the year like that, you would expect him to be getting a lot of accolades, right? Even though his next fight isn't at that level, fighting Gvozdyk at 175, nobody really feels that that's going to be much of a test, right? And it's funny that people aren't really criticizing him on his level of opponent, even though many people on YouTube, specifically some channels, love to harp at non-black fighters for having weak opposition and then justifying black fighters having weak opposition because they're all focused on a race narrative, right? And unfortunately, in this case, for some reason, they're not too interested in holding David Benavidez's feet to the fire. I wonder why. Is this because they don't like Canelo and they want him to be beat, so they're putting pressure on Canelo using Benavidez, kind of the same way Lopez was used against Lomachenko? And now we see the people that were once big fans of Lopez really are some of his biggest haters. Then we get to Jaron Ennis. Jaron Ennis, a guy that I've said for a long time, really projects as pound for pound one of the top fighters in boxing for the next 10 years. And the great news is, and this isn't me hating PBC, this is great news for me as an individual. The great news is that he just signed with Matchroom and DAZN. And as I said, I'm not hating. I assumed he was going to go to PBC, right? But he didn't. He went in a different direction, and I'm happy about that. Why? Because what that means is me living in Taiwan, I can watch him fight on DAZN. So that's fantastic. For me, living in Taiwan, ESPN and ESPN and PBC fights, whether I want to watch them or not, becomes very difficult because they're not shown in Asia on a platform that's easily available to me. So, that's why I would have been happy if everybody was on DAZN. Then I would have access to every major promoter in boxing, and that would be a godsend. So I'm happy Jaron Ennis is joining Matchroom. I'm a big Ennis fan, and now him going to a promoter that allows me to actually watch his fights, great. And the great thing about Matchroom, unlike what's been happening with PBC recently, and I know people getting their feelings about this, but facts are facts. PBC just isn't allowing their fighters to be as active as they should be. Whether that's that they don't have money, and I have no idea, I'm not their accountant, or they just don't have enough dates where they can give their fighters enough opportunities to get in front of the camera. And with a young, up-and-coming potential superstar like Jaron Ennis, that's the worst thing that could happen. Right now, he's 26 years old, and he's never won a world title. I know he was just gifted a world title, email title from the IBF, which is ridiculous. Crawford literally just won the title, and then they literally go ahead and strip him and give it to a guy that literally walked away from a Terrence Crawford fight, right? That's not hate. John Ennis, Virgil Ortiz, and the Cuban fighter, what's his face? I don't know. I can't remember their name. Yugas. Literally, these guys were in position to become WBO mandatory opponents for Terrence Crawford. And not one of those guys stepped up and took that opportunity. They all walked to a different sanctioning body to chase a different title, right? So that's the real funny thing about that. But that's boxing. So who can be surprised? Then, of course, we get to Jaime Munguia, who was on my list for one of the most exciting fighters in boxing. Him, like Navarrete, exciting fighters, all action, throw tons of punches, have good power, and are vulnerable, meaning that their fights turn out to be great, right? Exciting, back and forth. A fight where you really feel that potentially he could lose. And when he comes back and actually succeeds and wins, it's that much more fulfilling and that much more exciting. Obviously, now he's got a huge test ahead of him against Canelo Alvarez. And if he was able to use his volume to beat Canelo Alvarez, what a win that would be for Jaime Munguia. He would literally become a superstar overnight. Maybe not to some of these YouTube channels, but as far as globally and specifically in his home country of Mexico, he would become a superstar. A superstar, right? Because a lot of Mexican fans aren't fans of Canelo Alvarez. So they would love an opportunity to jump from one bandwagon to another and ride that, all the way to the bank. I like Munguia. He's an exciting fighter. I never feel disappointed when I watch him fight. Him against Canelo, I'm excited. I think it's a quality fight, and I was pushing for it, prior. And I said that if he had a very good win against John Ryder, there was no reason why you wouldn't want to put him in the ring with Canelo. And he did just that. So it's a fight I'm excited about. Then, of course, you have William Zepeda, 27 years old, still young, a guy that is definitely one of the most exciting fighters at 135 pounds. And I do have a little beef to pick because I was going to just compare him to Subriel Matias, who is obviously one of the most exciting fighters at 140. Both not the most polished fighters, both technically deficient in some areas, both get hit. But as we said with Munguia and Navarrete, vulnerability is a great thing. It makes your fights that much more exciting, that much more edge of your seat, right? And so that's not something I look down on. But what I look down on is the fact that Ring Magazine has Zepeda here, but they don't have world champion, IBF world champion, Subriel Matias, who I think deserves to be on this list just as much as Zepeda. I'm not saying more than Zepeda, but just as much, right? Obviously, Zepeda is a very exciting fighter who's had some sensational performances and just looks like he's getting better and better all the time. And what a fucking engine that guy has. And then, of course, we get Tim Tszyu. This was, of course, before he just lost to Funduro. And obviously, with him coming off of a loss, he may no longer be part of the Dynamite dozen. But there were situations involved in that fight that obviously sort of soured and changed the scenario a little bit. Obviously, Funduro was a late replacement, less than 2 weeks before the fight. Tim Tszyu stepped up to save the card, which saves the PBC a lot of money. I'm sure Al Heyman is very thankful for that. And the fight ended up being very exciting because of vulnerability. Obviously, a cut became a major factor in that fight. And prior to the cut, it looked like Tim Tszyu was going to make very short work of Sebastian Funduro. But after the cut, things really changed quite a bit. And I would like to think like better BF that Tim Tszyu would be able to bite down on the gum shield and do what he had to do to get the victory. But he wasn't able to. Funduro ended up scraping by with the victory and becoming a unified champion in the process. And obviously now Tim Tszyu is kind of left in limbo, waiting to see what options are available to him. Hopefully the PBC does him right because he deserves to be treated fairly. A rematch with him and Funduro would be obviously probably the best way for that thing to unfold, but we'll see how things go. Then we get to Alexander Usyk. Usyk, I think, is a great fighter. He's on my pound-for-pound top 10 list. Like others on this list that we just mentioned, the Dynamite doesn't. He was not on my most exciting fighters in boxing list. And as far as him being on the Dynamite doesn't list, I would think out of everyone on this list, maybe he is probably the least likely to be on this list. And I guess that depends on what the qualifications are to be part of the Dynamite dozen. Obviously, he's a pound for pound fighter. He's potentially going to become a two-weight undisputed champion like Inouye and Crawford, which is legendary, legacy making. So if he's able to do that, whoo, man, what a man, what a man. And maybe it's just that I don't really like his style. He's much more of a slick boxer, not get hit, pick and poke type of guy who doesn't make for the most exciting fights. So he's not a fighter that I really get excited, super excited to watch. But then again, the heavyweight division, the style of the heavyweight division, it's not one of the most exciting divisions in boxing. And so that might have something to do with it as well. Then we get, of course, to honorable mentions. And in honorable mentions, you have Janibek Elimeklunahe, who's obviously a very good fighter. But at this point, I don't know if he's an honorable mention on the Dynamite dozen, because at this point, he still has a lot to prove. I know he's a unified champion, but unfortunately, big opportunities to fight guys like Andrade and Munguia fell through, meaning that we haven't seen him with a higher level of opponent. Obviously, the Carlos Adames fight doesn't look like it's going to be made because Adames is part of the PBC. Charlo looks like he's not going to be fighting any longer at 160. So unfortunately for him, he's in a division where there's just not much happening. And because there's not much happening, how much credit can we give a guy who's in that division? Because we don't know what he's doing. It's kind of like Boots Ennis, who's on this list. Well, I think Boots is fantastic. I don't think he's pound for pound top 10. And I don't know if he's part of the Dynamite dozen based on what he's done so far. Down the road, easily Dynamite dozen and easily pound for pound top 10. But you got to give guys credit for what they're doing. The same way that I said Tank Davis is not a pound for pound list. It's not me hating on Tank Davis. He's on my list for most exciting fighters. For most exciting, I would put him top fucking 5 on any list any day. But based on what he's done, I don't think he's pound for pound. But that's my opinion. You may disagree. I'm not hating. I'm just giving you my opinion based on facts. Then we get to Tyson Fury. Obviously, he's going to be fighting Alexander Usyk to become undisputed. He's already become a 2-time heavyweight champion. He's beaten some really illustrious heavyweights in his career, obviously beating Klitschko, beating Wilder, beating Dillian White, beating Luis Ortiz, 4 quality names. And taking on an Usyk would be maybe the best win of his career, because Usyk is not in his prime, but more prime than probably a Wilder or a Klitschko were. And stylistically, he's very different than both of them. I don't know if it makes it easier for Fury or more difficult, but he's a very different style matchup. So it'll be interesting to see how Fury is able to deal with the smaller, quicker, very technically proficient fighter. And then, of course, Vasily Lomachenko. And if you're going to put Devin Haney on a pound-for-pound top 10 list, then you sort of got to put Lomachenko as an honorable mention, right? Currently, he doesn't have a world title, so I wouldn't put him on a pound-for-pound top 10 list. But considering the type of fight he just had with a far bigger opponent in Devin Haney, who is a pound-for-pound top 10 fighter, and many people feel Lomachenko beat him, and this is an older version of Lomachenko and a less active version than, potentially we could have had a few years earlier, where most people feel Lomachenko would have easily beat Devin Haney, who was just raw and inexperienced at that time. So I think him being honorable mention is fine. I expect that he's going to make quite a statement, dispatching Kambosos to become a 2-time lightweight champion. And hopefully then we'll see him get in unification fights with guys like Navarrete and Shakur to try to become a 3-weight champion. I don't know the possibility of him fighting Tank Davis for undisputed, but maybe Tank Davis will move to 140, and then Muratalla, Zepeda, or one of those other fighters will be able to win that WBA title, opening the door for undisputed at 135. We will see. Another strange thing about this list is that Devin Haney's not on this list. Because if you look at all the fighters on this list, they're not all powerful. Example, Usyk. Haney's coming off of sensational performances. Obviously, he's now a two-weight world champion. He was undisputed at 135 pounds. So, I think he probably should be on this list if you're going to have Usyk on this list, and probably ahead of a guy like Boots, who has never really won a title. I know he has a title, but the same criticism I gave Devin Haney for an email title, I need to be consistent and give the same sort of uh, lack of credit to Boots Ennis until he actually goes out and beats champions like Devin Haney did. There's always going to be questions, right? So that's one thing that I find strange about this list. Then we get to the other fighters on our list. This is obviously, honorable mention. Sabrina Matias, who I said, if you're going to put Zepeda on this list, I probably would have put Matias on this list above Zepeda. He's a champion. He's knocked out every single fighter he's fought. I know he lost to one of those guys, but then in the rematch, he knocked him out. Also, they have Christian Mbili, who is one of the most exciting 168-pound fighters in boxing. The question with him is he going to be able to get any of these other top fighters in the ring with his aggressive Sean Porter-esque type of style, and the fact that he's not part of the PBC? What's the possibility of him actually getting some of those fights at this moment, right? And that's a real question. We know that depending on what platform you fight for, it may be very difficult for you to get certain opponents, especially when you're dangerous, but you don't necessarily pull big money to the table. Then it brings us to, obviously, the other fighter right here, who is David Morrell. And David Morrell, I think, is the best fighter at 168. He's my favorite fighter. I wish he would leave PBC and join DAZN Matchroom so I could see him fight more often as well. And there is opponents for him at Matchroom as well, right? And it doesn't look like he can get the PBC opponents. Obviously, David Benavidez shows no interest in fighting him. Caleb Plant is not showing any interest in fighting him. Charlo is not going to go anywhere near him. Maybe we can get a Christian Mbila, Dave Morrell fight, right? Two of the top young fighters in boxing. I'm not sure who this other one is right here. Let me just make this smaller so I can see. Can I see? Luis Neri. Oh my God. Yes, I would not say that Luis Neri deserves to be honorable mention. And you notice that Devin Haney and Shakur Stevenson aren't even mentioned, which is kind of strange because this isn't necessarily based on the most exciting list, because there's some fighters here that aren't that exciting, right? But Neri is a guy that was dominated and destroyed by Brandon Figueroa in 7 rounds and is going to be destroyed coming up soon when he steps in to face the monster Nui in Japan in a huge event, which is 4 world title fights on one card. So if you want to see a great card, check out that card. I think in the States it's going to be shown on Amazon. So, those people that are watching PBC on Amazon, they also are going to get this card probably as well. Unfortunately, I live in Taiwan, and even though I have Amazon, none of these sporting events show on Amazon Taiwan's TV. So I fucking don't know. I don't know. But Luis Neri, I would not put him on this list. But this next fighter, Jay Opataya, definitely deserves to be on this list. He's a monster and just getting better and better. I really think he's going to destroy Marius Briedis in their rematch and really make a fucking statement. And he's a guy that Saudis are super excited about as well. They were talking about Bivol potentially moving up from 175 to go challenge him at cruiserweight. That's a fight they're really interested in. At this present moment, maybe we could get a Zurdo Ramirez versus a Jay Opataya. That would be a huge fight, and a fight that actually would gather interest in the US as well, because Zurdo, obviously Mexican Americans would be excited to watch him as well. And then you throw him in with a real legitimate opponent like Jay Opataya, who's got legitimate power, very good technique, and just really a bit of a mean fucking monster in the ring. Then, of course, we get Oscar Valdez. He's just coming off of a victory in his last fight. He's a he's the kind of guy like Brandon Rios and guys of that nature. You got to respect him because he comes to fight. He takes on top fighters consistently, whether he's winning or losing. We know that he's always going to be in fights with top guys and he's going to be giving it his all. The problem is he's just not that good. So when he steps in to face really legitimate fighters, generally he gets beat, as we've seen in the past. But you still got to give him props. I mean, a record of 31-2, 23 knockouts is nothing to be scoffed at. Obviously, now I think he's 32-2 with 23 knockouts. So, hats off to Valdez. He's a tough fighter who, comes to compete. And that's something you can give fighters credit for. Then, of course, you get Lee Woods, had some sensational performances. Obviously, was struggling to make 126. Apparently, he's moving up to 130. People thought we'd probably see him fighting the Welshman for his IBF world title. But at this point, we're not really sure what's going on with that. Maybe we could see him fight Oscar Valdez. That would be a great fight. Two tough fighters who've been in sensational matches, fight of the year competitions. You throw those two guys in the ring together and fucking something exciting is going to happen. Guaranteed. So, then we get to the gunslingers gone cold. And, obviously this is true. Fighters get older, things happen, they lose their luster, and a lot of the credit and praise they were once getting falls away. And with Edgar Berlanga, based on some of his piss poor performances, a lot of the hype around him has really fallen off. Charlo, the same. One Charlo, one undisputed, was on top of the world. Goes up for the money grab and embarrasses himself against Canelo Alvarez, looking like he was just in there for a paycheck. Didn't really look like he was like trying to compete at all. Didn't show much Valdez or Wood in him, right? Just sort of cruised to the bank. That's what he did. And maybe he's happy with that, but it's definitely let his fans down and definitely sort of ruined his name a little bit. And as far as his brother, with his mental health issues and whatnot, we don't really know what to expect from him. Obviously, the most likely fight is him against Caleb Plant. If that fight gets made, it's a quality fight. If he's able to beat Caleb Plant, he definitely puts himself right there on top of the 168-pound division, along with Benavidez, Morrell, and Canelo Alvarez. And that's a great group of fighters. And you potentially have some super fights right there. And then we have Isaac Cruz. Obviously, this was before Isaac Cruz just became a world champion. So, he just beat Rolly Romero. I heard Mike Tyson was out there saying that he was doing something illegal. I didn't watch the video, but let me know in the comment section below if you agree with Mike Tyson. I don't know if he cheated and didn't deserve to beat Rolly Romero, but all I know is he beat Rolly Romero like many people expected him to. And now he is a WBA 140-pound world champion. So don't be surprised if his next opponent is Tank Davis. Then, of course, we have Nonito Donaire. Donaire has had ups and downs in his career, obviously, several times. But at this age, obviously, he's a little past his prime, and we do expect that, the end is near, right? That's just what happens when you've been in the game for such a long period of time. He was on top of the world, then he got beat by Rico. He came back, won multiple world titles, and then got destroyed by Nicholas Walters. Struggled against some good opponents, and then moved down to 118 pounds and became a two-time champion and had a fight of the year against Inouye in the process. Then got knocked out in 2 rounds by Inouye in the rematch, lost in his opportunity to become a 3-time champion in his resurgence at 118. And at this point, who knows what's happening? All I know is that him and his wife are terrible trainers. And if I was a boxer, I would not train under them. Then, of course, we have one of my favorite fighters of all time, Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez. Gonzalez, after losing to Rung Vasai, after his coach died, really people thought that was really the end. He was in his mid-30s. For small fighters, generally that's the end of the line. But he bounced back, became a world champion, fought Estrada in a fight that the majority of boxing fans feel he deserved the victory. And I agree. I felt that was a far more convincing victory for him than the first time he beat Estrada. And then obviously he destroyed Martinez, the 115-pound world champion, who came up in weight to challenge him. He put a masterclass on him as an old man, right, coming off of a controversial loss. And then obviously he rematched Estrada, and Estrada really made a statement in the third fight. Definitely deserved the victory. And at this point, most of us would not be surprised if Roman Gonzalez retired at this point, right? He had his comeback, and at this point, he is getting up there. He's made some good money. He obviously lives in a country where the standard of living is cheaper, so his money will stretch a lot farther than the majority of us. But there is talk about him potentially trying to fight for one of those titles at 118 pounds to become a 5-weight world champion. So, well, I'm a huge Roman Gonzalez fan. The last thing I want to see him do is be embarrassed or put in a situation that's going to sort of tarnish his legacy. I felt the same way with Roy Jones, right? After Roy Jones lost to Tarver, I thought at that point he probably should just retire, right? Because the writing was on the wall, and then it just really slid downhill from there. And, enough was enough. People were just like, man, stop already. Come on, stop. You were a guy that people had as the best fighter of all time, pound for pound, number one, a superstar. And now guys like Floyd Mayweather have surpassed you, not based on what they've done, but based on what you didn't do. Right? Your failures later on in your career. And that's disappointing to many people that were huge Roy Jones fans. And then, of course, you have Mauricio Lara here, who at one time was considered one of the top 25 under 25 fighters. And he's still pretty young. And he became a world champion, but then he struggled to make weight at 126, sort of got exposed in his fight, moved up in weight, I think, to 130. Got beat there, I think, in his most recent fight at 130. And definitely looks like, too much money and just not enough motivation has gotten in the way of a guy that was one of the most exciting fighters in boxing. And unfortunately, that happens to many people. So, you can't be shocked or surprised. Then we get to Teofimo Lopez, and a lot of that has to do with his last performance, which people were very disappointed in. He was coming off of a great performance, a sublime performance, dominating and destroying Josh Taylor in a way that nobody had ever done before, kind of the way he fought Lomachenko and looked so sensational. And then to fight a Lomachenko opponent and arguably get beat, right, and look really, really terrible. And that's not the first terrible performance. We obviously saw him perform terrible against Kambosos. We saw him perform terrible against Sandor Martin. He scraped the victory, but he didn't win any fans on that night. So, his up and down performances have really sort of taken the air out of many people's balloons as being a fan. I still hope he does great. I would love nothing more than a Devin Haney-Lopez unification fight at 140. That, my friends, would be fucking dynamite. So let's hope that happens. And then, of course, we have Regis Prograis, who was coming off of a piss poor performance and then fought Devin Haney and was fucking manhandled and embarrassed, right? And it just shows you the style was wrong from the fucking outset. And we saw that in the previous fight where he fought a boxer who was using his jab and his boxing ability to make Regis chase him down. Regis's feet are fucking slow. His arms are short. He had problems getting inside range and letting his punches go. And that was just further exploited by Devin Haney, who went on to embarrass him, right? That's the only thing we can say. It was an embarrassing loss for Prograis, and it'll be interesting to see how he's going to bounce back. Maybe him against a guy like Isaac Cruz would be the perfect fight, because stylistically, Isaac Cruz is a far more style-appropriate opponent than a Devin Haney. So, let's hope that maybe he can get an Isaac Cruz world title fight. And then, of course, Deontay Wilder, who just got beat by Parker, right? It was supposed to be his comeback, big money in Saudi Arabia, and Anthony Joshua mega fight, and then he gets embarrassed and beat by Parker. And no hate, Parker just did that to the big Chinese fighter as well. So he's definitely on a roll. He's definitely in his resurgence periods for his career. So congratulations to Joe Parker. And then we have the under the radar fighters. Surrey Bolchak, who just had a fantastic performance on the undercard of Tim Tszyu, winning convincingly and putting himself in position as the WBC mandatory. And he should be getting the opportunity to fight for that WBC title. He probably should have been getting the opportunity to fight for that title before Funduro, right? Because Funduro we saw just get knocked out in his previous fight, whereas Bolchak got knocked out a few years ago, has since bounced back with quality victories, and he just had a quality victory, probably the best of his career. Sam Eglinton, I don't know if he's under the radar. He's a UK fighter who has been up and down in his career, had some quality wins, but at the same time was manhandled and embarrassed several times in his career. And you know, I would not say that Sam Eglinton is under the radar. The reason he's not getting a lot of attention is because at this point of his career, people know what he is. He's a good fighter whose game comes to perform, but he's limited. So, you can't expect him to, upset the apple cart when it comes to big name opponents. Kita Kurihara, the 18-8-1 Japanese fighter with 16 KOs. I'm unfamiliar with him, so he definitely is under the radar because I really pay attention to Japanese boxing, and I've never seen this kid fight. So I have no idea what I'm missing. I'm definitely going to check him out and see if I can find his fights on YouTube now that I've seen his name there. He's in the bantamweight division, which obviously right now is a great division, right? And there's 4 champions. So there's an opportunity for him to get a fight, maybe throwing him in with Inui's brother, who is the WBA champion. That would obviously be a big fight in Japan, 2 Japanese fighters going at it. That would obviously get the Japanese boxing public's attention. Then, of course, you have Raymond Muratalla, who definitely is under the radar. He was a guy that is coming off of a poor performance in his last fight, but had several really great quality performances that really started to get people to pay attention to him, and has been being mentioned as a potential opponent for Shakur Stevenson. His team, Garcia, was talking about how they had a phone call talking about if he would be interested in fighting Shakur, and they said, "Oh yeah, we're ready." And then that was all they heard. So, and obviously, apparently Shakur is moving in a different direction. I can't remember. Oh, he's potentially going to fight Frank Martin's last opponent, the German fighter who Frank Martin beat. I would say that Raymond Muratalla is a way better opponent, a way more interesting opponent. Muratalla is also a top-ranked fighter, so it's an in-house fight that makes a lot of sense. And because he is an American fighter, more people would be far more prone to watch that fight. Whereas people can't even pronounce the German fighter's name. And the only time they've seen him fight was against Frank Martin. Prior to that, nobody knew who the fuck that guy was. So I think it's a far less interesting fight, especially for a guy like Shakur Stevenson, who wants all the big fights, who's calling out all the big fighters. But then to take on an opponent like that seems very uninteresting as far as casual viewers are concerned. Then, of course, you get the tough South African fighter, Nonshinga. Ironically enough, I have many South Africans, and one of my good friends, we talk about football constantly and are in all kinds of pools. Obviously, he just did March Madness with us. Apparently he's going to be leaving my branch to go work at a different branch as a supervisor. And I'm like, fuck, man. Just say fuck that. You hate when you lose good friends that you work with because it really changes the whole dynamic of the office. Who knows who's going to replace him? It's definitely not going to be somebody that I'm nearly as interested in hanging out with. Sipiwe is a good man. So it's very disappointing that he's going to be leaving. But I was talking to him and bragging about Noshinga and telling him, whoa, South Africa, they got a really good young fighter in Noshinga. He's fighting this tough Mexican fighter, but, stylistically, it should be easy work for him. And then he goes in there and gets knocked the fuck out. And I was like, oh my God, I got to stop talking. I jinxed the guy. And then, of course, he came back, fought in Mexico, regained his world title in a sensational performance. And so now my South African friends at work, they have something to be proud of. Of course, South Africa has consistently produced a lot of really, really good small fighters, right? A lot of small fighters. It's ironic. A lot of their small fighters are all South African blacks, whereas most of their big fighters generally are South African whites, Boer South Africans, right? So obviously you can see there's a definitive size difference just naturally ingrained with South African sort of population. There's also the English South Africans. I don't know if any English South African has been a world champion boxer. I think there might have been, but I can't remember. But yeah, so Noshinga, very good fighter. I'm excited to see what he does moving forward. Obviously, there's potentially some nice fights for him in and around those weight divisions. And then, of course, we get to the last fighter who I had to add this page because his name wasn't there, and that's Shinjiro Shigioka, who just defended his world title. Obviously, he's 10-0 with 8 KOs. He just defended his world title on a card where his brother, who was also a world title champion at 108 pounds, ended up being beaten by, what's his name? Melvin Jerusalem, a Filipino fighter who was a ex-world champion at that weight class. So, those are two exciting young fighters. I have the fights here on my products, but I haven't sat down to actually get to watch them. The problem with many of these good Japanese or Asian fighters is it's difficult to watch their fights live. So I have to wait until their fights are put online so I can actually see them. But what do you think of Ring Magazine's list? Who do you think deserves to be on this list? Obviously, people are going to mention Devin Haney, who I think should be part of the Dynamite dozen. Shakur, maybe not so much at this point. He might probably be on that secondary list of fighters who slid based on poor performances like Lopez was on. And I could see him being on that list. But I definitely think Haney should be on the first list, specifically above guys like Usyk. I mean, because whether you like Haney or not, his last two performances were great. Whether you felt he beat Lomachenko or not, he was game. He showed a lot of heart in that fight. He took the punishment from Lomachenko and stayed in it. Some people feel he even won the 12th round, which gave him the edge. He also went to the body, dug in deep. So he definitely showed that he's able to fight in different fashions, which is important. And then he went on and fucking masterclassed and destroyed Regis Prograis, which was a dominant ass beating, right? Very similar to what we saw Bud Crawford do to Errol Spence. So, I think he definitely deserves to be on the list, but let me know if you think anyone else deserves to be on this list. Anyone that maybe they didn't list and they don't have there. Maybe I can do a follow-up video if there is enough attention to it. I generally say I do a follow-up video, but unfortunately, I don't get enough comments in the comment section actually talking about the fight, giving the kind of input where you could actually continue to follow through on these kind of things. Unfortunately, we get a lot of trolls and people who are, cloning other channels. And it's just like, dude, man, what the fuck is the point of doing that? Right? It doesn't bring anything except you really showing that you're just a fucking child. Because who would do that? Like, I can honestly say, for the over 10 years I've been on YouTube, I've never fucking cloned a channel. People threaten or accuse me of it, but I've never done that. I wouldn't. Why the fuck would I waste my time? I got better things to do with myself than make up a fucking channel and pretend to be somebody or just to fucking troll people under somebody else's name. Please. People done that to me. Back in the day, that used to be a very normal sort of thing. And I really thought we got past that and people weren't so fucking immature and childish. But unfortunately, we're getting a resurgence of it. And if you guys do that on my channel, I'm just going to fucking block everybody. At this point, my channel fucking doesn't have many people, so it doesn't fucking bother me to block fucking people. I'm not at a point where I'm making AdSense off of videos. Thanks, John. So it doesn't matter, right? I need fucking hundreds and hundreds of followers. The 6,000 people that subscribed to my channel in the past, it'd be nice if they came back, but who knows who they were and who knows where they went. And if I'm just going to have people cloning other people and creating chaos on my channel, I'm just going to fucking block all of you. That's it. And if you're a real fan and a real subscriber to my channel, you just come back afterwards and I'll welcome you with open arms. But in the meantime, I'm not putting up with that shit because it just becomes fucking annoying reading the comments, the back and forth, which has nothing to do with boxing and is just a bunch of fucking kindergarten fucking children playing. Really, that's all it seems like. But thanks for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, and share. Leave your comments below, and I will see you next time. The weekend is upon us. Boxing is here. Obviously, this weekend we have the heavyweight clash on ESPN. Jared Big Baby Anderson and Effie Ajagba are getting back in the ring for potentially a fight that will build towards both of those fighters facing each other, which would be great. I would love to see Anderson, Effie Ajagba fight. I do feel that Anderson technically is better and would win that fight, but it's definitely a quality opponent. Effie Ajagba is dangerous, long, good power, and tough, resilient fighter. So it definitely is an exciting fight when or if that gets made. But leave your comments below. Thanks for watching. Peace out. And yeah, what do you think? Can Liverpool win? I mean, they fucking dropped it against Man U. Fuck me. But c'est la vie. You know, that's the way things go. You can't get angry over nothing. Unfortunately, people on internet, that's what they do.